Hey everyone, my name's Braden. We're going to go over how to get started with Jupyter Notebooks, including how to install it and some of the basic commands and features of Jupyter Notebooks. So to start off, we'll want to navigate to the folder that we're going to use, and then by clicking Shift and right click, we can open PowerShell window here. If you don't have this option, then there are a lot of tutorials online. I'll also create a video in the future on how to do this. From here, we can open up our virtual environment if you have one. If you're not sure what that is, I do have a video, and I'll put the link above and below on how to do that. So we'll start our virtual environment. And now that we have our virtual environment running, as indicated here, we can pip install Jupyter. Alright, now that Jupyter is installed, I should have pointed this out before. If we scroll up to this command, this is not a typo, as you probably realize since the command actually ran as expected. Jupyter is spelt with a Y. Now that we have Jupyter installed, we can open up a notebook by typing Jupyter, once again with a Y, notebook, and then hit enter. And it should open up a browser. Mine opened up on my other screen, so I'll just drag it over here with our Jupyter notebooks ready to go. So we see here that we have our folder structure, and we can create a new notebook by clicking new and Python 3. If you have other versions of Python, the other versions will be run here. And this will open up our notebook. So this is a simple way to run our code. Right here is a code cell where we can run our code. I like to first start off by giving it a title. Let's call it Jupyter Tutorial. This is what the file will be saved as in our folder over here. We see that it has a .ipynb file extension. That's how we'll know it's a Jupyter notebook, and we can open it from here. So we can select new and open up a new notebook, or if we already have a notebook, we can open that old notebook from here. So this is our code cell. We can type our code here. Let's say print hello world classic. And we can run our code by hitting this button here, run, and that will execute our code and insert another code cell below it. So we see our output right here. This is one of the conveniences of Jupyter Notebooks, is that it'll run our code and then immediately underneath show our output. Running our code by pressing the button up here works, but it can be easier by using some keyboard shortcuts. One keyboard shortcut that I often use is Control plus Enter at the same time. That will run our cell and we won't have to press the button. If you notice, a new cell wasn't added here, so we can add that by going to Insert, insert a cell below, insert a cell above. Let's insert one below. We can also run our code in a different way by pressing Alt and Enter. And that will automatically enter a new code cell right below the one that we just ran. So we recognize a pattern here. First, I use the traditional print statement to display our code. The nice thing about Jupyter Notebooks is if you're just running one line of code, or if you have multiple lines, the very last line of code will be displayed in the output. So when we use our traditional methods of print, we won't have an out right here. But when we rely on Jupyter Notebooks to give us the output, it will display this out here. We also see in these brackets, this was the first line of code run, the second line, the third line. So if we run this piece of code again, let's hit Control Enter. Now it's the fourth line of code that was run. So we can kind of see the order that we ran our code in. I like to have a bunch of empty code blocks, code cells, so that I don't have to always hit Control Enter and then Alt Enter or inserting the cells. So I'll just press Alt and Enter several times, and then that way I have a bunch of empty code cells for me. I prefer it that way. You can do it however you prefer. We have a lot of options for how we use our code cell. By going up to the top and clicking Cell, it gives us those options. We can also change the cell type. Right now it is code, so we can actually run code. If we wanted to make a section specifically for notes, I like to use this to make headers to organize my code. We can say Markdown. So this will remove the in here, and that's how it indicates it's a Markdown cell, and that just means that we can put in text rather than code. So to make a header, I use the hashtag or number symbol followed by the header title, and then press Control Enter. So here we have a nice section title, header title. So we can organize our code with these headers. We can also add in a description with regular text and run it that way. So we have a title and a description. It's nice to organize our code. If we had some code here that we ran, and wanted to add another section, we can do that. So we'll go back to cell type, Markdown, and create a new section that way. There are a bunch of keyboard shortcuts in addition to the ones I've gone over, or if you forget what they are, you can go to the Help button and go to Keyboard Shortcuts, and it'll pull up all the different shortcuts that we can use here. I'll let you go over that on your own time. We notice here that our Jupyter Notebook is being saved. Right now there are unsaved changes, but by default every 120 seconds Jupyter Notebooks will save our notebook. We can do that manually by pressing Control S. If you're on a Mac, Command S. You can also do that by the drop down here, File, Save As. We can also download our notebook in various formats here, so a PDF perhaps, or if you want the Python code. I've made the mistake before of literally copying and pasting every single line of code into a different file when it's much easier just to go to Download As and then a .py file. We might want to stop the execution of our code for whatever reason. Perhaps we accidentally made an infinite loop. If you don't know what that is, it is a piece of code that will just keep running and running and running until our computer crashes. So we will make one right now just for illustrations purposes. We're going to create a variable, and this stuff I'll go over in the next video actually what all of these mean, but just to show you some functionality on Jupyter Notebooks, I will create an infinite loop. So our variable I is 10, and while I is greater than 1, we're going to say I is equal to I plus 1. So this is going to run forever. So while I is greater than 1, I is 10, so it is greater than 1, we're going to add 1 to it. So it'll be 10, and then 11, 12, 13, 14, until our computer crashes. It'll just keep adding and adding and adding and adding. It won't be able to stop. So if we run this, Control Enter, we'll notice a few things. So this right here means that our code is executing. We can stop it by saying interrupt the kernel. That will stop it, or going up to kernel and interrupt. So we'll click that. And then we notice this error message here, and it says that there was a keyboard interrupt and it stopped our code. That was good. You might have heard my computer fan starting to ramp up in the background as it was running this little piece of code over and over and over and over and over again until I stopped it. So if for whatever reason you need to stop Jupyter Notebooks from executing, you can do that with this square button or kernel interrupt. We can also restart it, and that will clear everything that we've entered and give us a fresh start to our notebook. It won't delete any of the code that we've included, but it will stop remembering everything that we've run. So Jupyter Notebooks remembers what happened in the previous cell. So if we made a variable called name and assigned it to my name, Braden, and once again, if some of this doesn't quite make sense, like what is a variable, why are you putting this in parentheses, I'll go over that in the next video. I just want to demonstrate some of these features of Jupyter Notebooks so we get a feel of the tool that we're going to use for our code, and then we'll get into more of the code. Now this code is run. We see that it has been executed here because it has a number. And if we were to say print name, it will print my name even though it's in a different cell. Just a couple other little tips left. If you want to see more of these code cells and less of this information here, you can change that by going to View, Toggle Header, and Toolbar. That will turn those off. And then you can turn it back on by pressing the same buttons. And that's the basics of Jupyter Notebooks. Thanks for watching, and please consider liking and subscribing if you found this content helpful.